Bar Rules Series. Constitutional Law.
Justiciability. Standing. To have standing to bring a claim. The plaintiff must 1. Have an injury in fact. 2. Caused by the alleged conduct. And 3. Redressable by the remedy sought. Organizational standing. An organization has standing to bring a claim if 1. Its individual members have standing in their own right. The interests are germane to the organization's purpose, and the case does not require individual participation of the members. Third-party standing. A plaintiff has standing to bring a claim asserting the rights of a third party if 1. The third party is unable to assert the right on their own. 2. There is a special relationship between the plaintiff and third party. And 3. The injury affects that relationship. Timing. Mootness. The court will not hear a case if the controversy has been eliminated by the time of the proceedings. An exception applies to a controversy which is moot, but capable of repetition yet evading review. Ripeness. The court will not hear a case unless there is a live controversy or immediate threat of harm. It will not hear a claim of possible future harm. 11th Amendment. The 11th Amendment provides immunity to the states from a federal suit against them by citizens of another state or a foreign nation. The states have sovereign immunity in their own courts. State action. A constitutional claim must allege government action, as the Constitution applies to the federal government and state governments through the 14th Amendment. A private party may also be subject to a constitutional claim if 1. The party performs a traditional government function. 2. There is significant government involvement in the private activity, entanglement, or 3. The action involves judicial enforcement of a private contract. Power. State power. 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment provides that powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states. This bars the federal government from commandeering state governments by compelling states to pass laws or perform federal functions. Congress. Article 1. Congress is a body of limited, enumerated powers. Commerce Clause. Congress has the power to regulate interstate commerce. This gives them authority to regulate the 1. Instrumentalities of 2. Channels of and 3. Persons and things moving in interstate commerce. Congress may also regulate activities, even those that are purely intrastate, if such activities in the aggregate substantially affect interstate commerce. Tax and Spend Clause. Congress may tax and spend for the general welfare. A tax must have a reasonable relationship to revenue. War. Congress has the power to declare war and to raise and support the military. Necessary and Proper Clause. Enabling Clause. Congress has broad authority to enact laws that are necessary and proper for executing its enumerated powers. Under the 14th Amendment, Congress has similar power against the states. Executive. The President can supervise the executive branch through the issuance of executive orders. The power of the President is at its apex when he acts with congressional approval, is moderate when Congress has been silent, and is at its nadir when he acts against congressional wishes. Limits on state power. Preemption. Under the Supremacy Clause, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Federal law supersedes state law if the state law directly conflicts with federal law. Conflict preemption. Impedes the objectives of federal law. Obstacle preemption. Or regulates an area traditionally occupied by Congress. Field preemption. Dormant Commerce Clause. States may not 1. Discriminate against or 2. Unduly burden interstate commerce, even if Congress has not regulated the activity. Discrimination. A state statute is discriminatory if it protects local interests at the expense of out-of-state interests. It is permitted only if the regulation is necessary to achieve an important purpose and no less discriminatory alternative is available. Undue burden. If the state statute is not discriminatory, the law may still be invalid if it causes an undue burden on interstate commerce. Under the Pike balancing test, a court will evaluate whether the 1. State law serves a legitimate local purpose and whether the 2. Burden on interstate commerce is clearly excessive compared to the local benefits. Market participant exception. When the state is acting not as a regulator but rather as market participant, the state may favor local interests over those of out-of-towners. Privileges and immunities. P&I clause. Under the comity clause, citizens of each state are entitled to the privileges and immunities of the several states, which prevents states from discriminating against out-of-state citizens regarding fundamental rights, usually involving employment and travel. Corporations and aliens are not afforded protection. Any such regulation is subject to strict scrutiny. The out-of-state citizens must be a 1. Peculiar source of evil. 2. The discrimination must be substantially related to this evil. And 3. No less discriminatory means are available. Full faith and credit. Under the full faith and credit clause, a state court 1. Must recognize and enforce, and 2. Is prohibited from reconsidering or altering a judicial decision by a court in another state when 1. That court had proper personal and subject matter jurisdiction, 2. The decision was a final judgment, and 3. On the merits. Contracts clause. States cannot retroactively impair contract rights. For a private contract, legislation relieving a private party of their contract obligation, the law must be reasonable and appropriate to achieve a significant and legitimate public purpose. Similar to rational basis. For a public contract, legislation relieving the government of its contract obligation, the law must be necessary to serve an important public purpose. Similar to intermediate scrutiny, individual rights, due process. Under the Fifth Amendment, incorporated to the states through the 14th Amendment, the government may not deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Substantive due process. Substantive due process protects fundamental rights, which are deeply rooted in the nation's traditions and implicit in the concept of ordered liberty. These rights typically involve family formation, voting, and other First Amendment rights. Any regulation depriving a person of a fundamental right must meet strict scrutiny, meaning that the regulation must be necessary to achieve a compelling government interest. Procedural due process. Procedural due process requires a fair process before depriving a person of life, liberty, or property. For a judicial proceeding, a party is entitled to notice and an opportunity to be heard. For a non-judicial proceeding, fairness is determined by balancing the individual interest at stake, the risk of erroneous deprivation, and the government's interest, including fiscal burdens. Matthews factors. Taking requirement. The Fifth Amendment's takings clause prohibits the government from taking private property for public use without providing just compensation. Regulation. A regulation is not usually a taking, but it can be if 1. The economic impact is severe. 2. It interferes with reasonable investment-backed expectations. And 3. The character of the regulation is overly burdensome. Just compensation. If a taking has occurred, the owner is entitled to just compensation, which is generally measured by the fair market value of the property at the time of the taking. Equal protection clause. Under the 14th Amendment, applied to the federal government through the 5th Amendment, a state may not deny any person the equal protection of the laws. The state may not treat similarly situated persons differently. Discrimination by a regulation can be facial, as applied, or based on disparate impact. The level of review depends upon the class of persons affected. A suspect classification is based on race, national origin, or alienage, and is subject to strict scrutiny, meaning the government must establish that the regulation is necessary to achieve a compelling government interest. A quasi-suspect classification is based on gender or non-marital birth, and is subject to intermediate scrutiny, meaning that government must establish that the regulation is substantially related to an important government interest. For non-suspect classifications, the regulation must meet rational basis, meaning that the regulation is rationally related to a legitimate government interest. The plaintiff must show there is no rational basis. Fundamental right. If the disparate treatment involves a fundamental right, such as voting, travel, or First Amendment rights, then the regulation is subject to strict scrutiny. Religion. The First Amendment, applied to the states through the 14th Amendment, prevents the government from interfering with religious freedom. There are two clauses. Free exercise. The Free Exercise Clause bars any law that prohibits or excessively burdens the free exercise of religion. Such regulation must meet strict scrutiny, meaning it must be necessary to achieve a compelling government interest. However, a neutral law of general applicability which only has an incidental effect on religion need only meet rational basis review. Establishment. The Establishment Clause prohibits laws respecting the establishment of religion. The government may not favor or endorse specific religious groups. If the government action favors a particular religious group, sect preference, the regulation must meet strict scrutiny, meaning it must be narrowly tailored to achieve a compelling government interest. If the government action does not have a sect preference, the regulation must be evaluated based on historical practices and understandings to determine its alignment with the principles of the Establishment Clause. Speech. The First Amendment, incorporated to the states through the 14th Amendment, protects an individual's right to freedom of speech and expression. Regulation of speech first depends on whether the regulation is content-based or content-neutral. Content-based speech. A content-based speech regulation restricts the communicative expression of the speech. Such regulations must meet strict scrutiny, meaning that it must be necessary and narrowly tailored to achieve a compelling government interest. Exceptions. Certain types of speech are considered unprotected. Regulation of such unprotected speech must only meet rational basis review. Obscenity. The government may ban obscenity, which is speech that taken as a whole from an objective viewpoint 1. Appeals to the prurient, sexual interest, 2. Is patently offensive from a community standard, and 3. Lacks literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Incitement. The government may ban incitement, which describes speech that is intended to cause imminent lawless action and is likely to do so. Fighting words. The government may ban fighting words, which are words that are likely to cause an immediate breach of the peace. Content-neutral speech. Time, place, and manner restrictions regulate speech not based on their communicative expression but rather the mode of communication. The level of scrutiny of such regulation depends on the forum in which the speech is occurring. Forum. Public, designated. A public forum is a place that has traditionally been open to the public for the expression of ideas. Quintessential public forums include parks and public sidewalks, streets. Designated public forums are those areas that are not typically open to public expression but which the government has intentionally opened for expressive activities. These include meeting rooms at public universities. Government regulation in a public or designated forum must be content-neutral, narrowly tailored to achieve a significant government interest, and leave open alternative channels of communication. Forum. Limited, non-public. A limited public forum is government property opened for limited use by certain groups. An example is a library or a school classroom available for official school-recognized clubs. A non-public forum is government property not open for public expressive activities, such as polling sites and airports. Government regulation in a limited or non-public forum must be viewpoint neutral and reasonably related to a legitimate government interest. Commercial speech. Commercial speech is business-related speech which proposes a commercial transaction, such as an advertisement. The government may regulate such speech if the regulation serves a substantial government interest, directly advances that interest, and is narrowly tailored such that there is a reasonable fit to the interest. The government may prohibit speech relating to an illegal activity or misleading speech. Symbolic speech. Symbolic speech is the expression of ideas through symbols. Armband, or communicative conducts. Flag burning, including not speaking. The government may regulate such expression if 1. The regulation is within the power of the government. 2. Furthers an important interest unrelated to the suppression of speech. And 3. Burdens no more speech than necessary. Vagueness. A regulation will be deemed unconstitutionally vague if the speech or conduct is so unclearly defined that a reasonable person cannot determine what is prohibited. Overbreadth. A regulation will be deemed unconstitutionally overbroad if the regulation is so sweeping that it prohibits both protected and unprotected speech. Unfettered discretion. A regulation, license, or permit action will be deemed unconstitutional if it grants unfettered discretion to a single or small group of decision-makers without clear objective grounds for issuance. Prior restraint. Prior restraint on speech are presumed unconstitutional and are allowed only when the government can show serious threat with regard to national security. Even if a prior restraint is unconstitutional, a party must comply with the order until it is overturned. Under the collateral bar rule,